So we have finally reached the end of Unit 1, and we're going to talk about intercepts and symmetry. So in this first video, we're just going to focus on intercepts and using that to sketch graphs. So here are the definitions of x-intercept and y-intercept. The x-intercept is the value of x when y is 0. Graphs, functions can have more than one x-intercept. The y-intercept is the value of y when x is equal to 0. So let's go ahead and look at 3 different functions. So let's start off with the first one, which is just a linear equation, a, y equals x plus 2. So if I'm trying to find the x-intercept, that means that y equals 0. And I'm going to solve that for x. So I have an x-intercept at -2, 0. So on this graph, I'm going to plot that point. And I'm just going to put a point on -2 on the x-axis. Now to find the y-intercept, well, that means that x is equal to 0. So I have y equals 0 plus 2. Y equals positive 2. So we're going to write that point as 0, 2. And when we connect that, that would be what that graph would look like for question A. So now let's look at question B, which is a parabola. Let's start off by finding our x-intercepts, which means that y is equal to 0. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. And here's the thing that is often forgotten. When you take the square root of a number, you actually have 2 answers, positive and -1. So we actually have 2 x-intercepts. The first one is at -1, 0. And the second one is at +1, 0. So we're going to put down 2. To find our y-intercept, well, that means that x is 0. So we have y equals 0 squared minus 1, which is y equals -1. And we put our point at 0, -1. So any function that is squared is a quadratic, and the graph of a quadratic is a parabola. And that is what that is going to look like. Now let's look at the last one, which is C. And I find my x-intercepts. Y equals 0, so that's 4x squared plus 0 equals 4. So 4x squared equals 4. Divide by 4. Take the square root. And again, we have 2 x-intercepts. So let's plot those. To find our y-intercept, that would be 4 times 0 squared plus y equals 4. Anything times 0 is 0. So y equals 4 is my y-intercept. So 0, positive 4. So notice that this parabola, because our y-intercept is positive, we know that, and our x-intercepts, and we actually do have x-intercepts, we know that this parabola is facing down. So for the next two, we are simply going to find our intercepts. So example 2, we're going to find our intercepts. So this one is a square root function. So to find our x-intercept, remember f of x is the same as y. So 0 equals negative. Then I have x plus 16 plus 4. So I'm going to subtract the 4. And that negative that's right in front of the radical, I need to divide that out. When I divide both sides by -1, it's positive. When I square both sides, on the right, it gets rid of the radical. So x equals 0. So whenever I have an x-intercept of 0, then I automatically know that the y-intercept is also 0. Okay, but let's just go ahead and verify that. But we know that our x-intercept is 0, 0. So that means our y-intercept is also at 0, 0. But let's just verify that algebraically. To find our y-intercept, that means that x is equal to 0. So y equals negative. Then we have a 0 plus 16 underneath the square root plus 4. So y equals negative square root of 16 plus 4. The square root of 16 is 4. So y equals negative 4 plus 4. And that verifies what we thought. So the x-intercept and y-intercept is at 0, 0. Okay, our last question. For the function r of x, let's find our x and y-intercepts. So to find our x-intercept for question B, that means that r of x is 0. So I'm going to add 25 to both sides. I'm going to then divide by 16. And when I take the square root, I get positive and negative 5/4. Anytime you take the square root, you have two answers. So my x-intercepts are one is at, and you can write it as one ordered pair. You don't have to separate it into two. So you could also just say plus and minus 5/4. So that is my x-intercept. Let's find our y-intercept. So that means that x is 0. So y equals 16 times 0 squared minus 25. y equals negative 25. So our y-intercept is at 0, negative 25.